you must know that the poet has also used some figures of speech in the poem. And what are the figures of speech that the poet has used in the poem? Number one, the poet has used figures of speech. Number one, metaphor. Number two, personification. Number three, anaphora. And number four, oxymoron. Number five, visual imagery. And number six, auditory imagery. So these are major figures of speech that the poet has used, and in which oxymoron is a new term that we have learned today. Oxymoron, the rest of the figures of speech we have already known about it, we have already studied about it, we have learned them all: metaphor, personification, anaphora, and imagery, all sorts of imagery, visual, auditory, touch, and all sorts of imagery that we have already completed. So let's discuss them one by one. Metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which implied comparison is made between two unlike things. I hear leaves drinking rain. So as students, you know that a metaphor is a figure of speech in which something is used as a representative, or which has got symbolic significance of something. So in the poem, the phrase you can see rich leaves is a metaphor. So this metaphor refers to rich people in the society. So no comparison is made. It is an implied simile where comparative words such as like, as are not used, but it is a direct statement. I hear leaves drinking rain. So here rich leaves on top. Here the poet has used metaphor over here. And the second figure of speech that the poet has used, that is oxymoron. Oxymoron, what is an oxymoron? Is a figure of speech in which two opposite and contradictory things are put together to create sound effect of the poem. So what is an oxymoron? Oxymoron is basically what? It is a figure of speech in which two opposite or contradictory things or ideas are juxtaposed together. And why they are put together? Just to create a strong effect of something. An example of oxymoron you can see over here. For example, we have in this poem, "'Tis a sweet noise to hear," and I have underlined this phrase, sweet noise. So yeah, you can see over here how the poet has used oxymoron, because the very word noise is something which is very harsh, which is unpleasant, and something a very pinching one. So if we are going to see the structure, how the poet has used oxymoron over here, the poet has used the very word sweet with it. So this is an example of oxymoron, as the poet has used the phrase sweet noise. Third point, personification. It is a figure of speech in which an object or idea is given human attributes. So this is the definition of personification, which means that an object or idea is given human attributes. The qualities of living things is given to non-living things or an abstract idea. In this poem, we have an example: "These green leaves drinking near." And I have underlined the phrase "leaves drinking." It means that this is personification used by the poet, because drinking is the quality of living beings. Human beings drink water, animals drink water. So these are the qualities or attributes of living beings, that they drink water. So the qualities of living beings is given to inanimate object is called personification. Visual imagery. Visual imagery, it is a figure of speech in which a visual image of something is created in our mind. So what is an imagery? Do you know and do you have any idea what is an imagery? Yes, definitely. I hope you know it because we have already done imagery. Imagery is something that the poet wants to create a picture in our mind, and when that picture is created, whenever we are reading a poem, there is created an image of that thing, and that image which is created in our mind, it is called an imagery. So an imagery is a figure of speech that creates an image of something in our mind. And many types of imagery that we have done, as you know, that is visual imagery, auditory imagery, tactile means like touch, and then olfactory imagery, olfactory which means that a thing that can be smell, and gustatory which is related to taste. So these are the imageries that we have already learnt. We already know about it. So this is the figure of speech, that is visual imagery, that the poet has used in this poem. And how do we come to know? Because image that is created in our mind, and we get to know that how the poet has used visual imagery. So these are the examples that I have written over here after the poem. The sun comes out, this rain shall stop, a wondrous light will fill each dark round drop. The sun shines bright, it will be a lovely sight. Now, all these words, if you are going to imagine, like whenever we are going to see such a picture, definitely comes to our mind of sun, like how the sun will come out, how the rain will fall on the thick leaves, and then how that raindrops would go under the under the thin leaves that are the poor leaves, and then the poet says that the rain stops, and then afterwards a wondrous light. So each round, like these are the words, when we read the poem, an image was created in our mind. So that is called a visual imagery. I hope you have understood this visual imagery. When we read the poem, a picture was created in our minds. That picture is called a visual imagery. So the whole poem is basically based on visual imagery. Number 5, auditory imagery. It is a type of mental imagery which helps the listener to perceive a sound. So auditory imagery, it is also a type of mental imagery which helps the listener to perceive a sound. And how we are going to perceive a sound? And as we know that as far as the definition of imagery is concerned, we know about it, like a picture is created in our mind, like something which is not real, but we are going to see it because mental imagery is there, we are going to perceive. So in the same way, the sound is basically not there, but we are going to hear it in our mind. So that is auditory imagery, that we are going to perceive a sound, we are going to hear a sound. But how we are going to hear a sound, you would be wanted to know. In the absence of an external auditory stimulus, means the sound is basically not there, we are not going to hear it, but we are going to hear it in the absence of external auditory stimulus. So, what is an auditory imagery the poet has used in the poem? "'Tis a sweet noise to hear." So, we are going to hear a noise that is very sweet one, that is very pleasing one. When the raindrops fall on the thick leaves, that the drop that trickle down to the lower leaves, a sound would be produced. So the poet is basically wants the reader or listener to listen to that sound when the raindrops trickle down the lower leaves or the thin leaves. So that sound is basically called an auditory imagery. So this noise word is an auditory imagery used or implied by the poet. Number 6, anaphora. It is a figure of speech which involves the repetition of a word or phrase used to emphasize what? The meaning or the message. So here in this poem, have you identified how the poet has used anaphora? Anaphora means when the poet has used a literary device or figure of speech which involves a repetition of a word, a repetition of a phrase It can be at the beginning of a sentence, it can be at the end of a sentence. And what is the purpose of using anaphora? The purpose of using anaphora is simply to give emphasis and reinforce the meaning or message of the poem. So here in this poem, the poet has used very skillfully anaphora. At the very beginning of the stanza, the poet says, I hear leaves drinking rain. I hear rich leaves on the top. So these are the examples of anaphora that the poet has used over here. Now you can see I hear in the very first line, and then again in the second line the poet says I hear